Today's episode is a little bit different, as we're not just exploring trauma as an idea and a way to heal from it. Instead, we're going through the journey with someone who literally lived a near-death experience where her family was in harm's way and they got out. And not only that, she has found ways to thrive and survive through her own personal journey and helping others with their own mental, emotional, and spiritual health. But the thing that really stands out the most to me about Molly is her authenticity, her openness, and gosh, how courageous she was during those moments where she wasn't sure if her and her husband were going to live or die. So I hope that this episode just brings you a little bit of insight into what it's like to go through such a life-altering experience, and that going through something even that harrowing can still lead to immense healing and the ability to integrate your past trauma into your current fabric of your story and move forward. I hope you enjoy this episode. I will absolutely be having Molly back, where we're going to dive a little bit deeper into generational trauma. But today, here's her story. So Molly, can you share what it was that happened to your family that really led to this whole journey and direction that your life took?
Yes. So kind of backing up a little bit, and our story is complex. So my husband has been in the natural health and wellness industry for nearly 40 years. So there's a 20-year difference between him and I. And he's been in the industry, the same industry, all of his life. Long story short, this is All In Nutritionals is his fifth company. So he had 4 companies prior to this, all that were very successful. They were really big all over the world, very corporate, like your typical corporate business. And so in 2015, the year that we got married, again, long story short, he had decided to walk away from the businesses, the corporate world. There was just a lot of, he got into the industry to help people, and there was a lot of just corporate toxicity going on in his company that he didn't like. And he just, he was tired and kind of ready to retire. And, so he walked away from that business, and we just kind of said, hey, we're going to live a nice, quiet life. So we thought, with our kids, with our family. We lived in a small town in Ohio called Yellow Springs. And so that's what we did. And we're a second marriage. So we had a blended family. I have 2 sons. He had 2 daughters. And so we were just basically kind of living our life and enjoying his retirement, so to speak. And then in 2020, we went through a really significant trauma where his ex-wife and her husband at that time, they showed up at our home one day. It was like 11 o'clock in the morning on a Wednesday. We were coming home from town. We had gone in to get some breakfast and run some errands, and we pulled into our driveway and got out to get the mail. And I'm skipping a lot of parts. So to keep it not too, I could go on and on. It's a very complex story, like I said, but got back into the car from getting the mail, and I looked over, and there was a man with a ski mask on and a gun pointed at me through my window of my car. Obviously didn't know who it was at that point, He was fully masked, but it ended up being, like I said, my husband's ex-wife and her husband. They basically ambushed us in our driveway. There had been issues with them for several years. There was a lawsuit going on, and for whatever reason, I guess they thought this was the way to resolve that. And so they came there to kill us, basically, in the driveway of our home. And thankfully, we had our conceal and carry. And my husband was able to think very quickly and respond very quickly under obviously great duress, and was able to save our lives. And for anybody that wants to see, like, if you're listening to this and you're like, well, how exactly did that all play out? we do have a video on our website. So on all of the websites, All In, Nutritionals, Tattoos of My Soul, and Revive, it's under our story. And you can go, it's a YouTube video. It's about 15 minutes long, but it explains everything in detail. So it kind of makes more sense. But yeah, So he was able to save our lives. Both of them died that day. She, died right by my door, on the ground right there. I heard her take her last breath. And then he died as well. And we went through the whole investigation process because when two people die in the driveway of your home,
Right.
there has to be an investigation to figure out
Of
why.
course. Yeah.
And so there was about a 7 month investigation where the investigators looked at all angles, and they found out that they had cased our property for over a year. It was very premeditated. Um, there were things found in their trunk that suggested there was a lot of harm in plan for us that day. They had tickets to Costa Rica, fake license plates, all the things. It's
Wow.
I always say, like, the best way I can describe it is it's literally like an episode of Dateline NBC.
Yeah.
Like, I actually will watch that show and I'm like, that's really similar to ours. Like it's
Yeah.
just so similar, kind of the scorned ex-wife and all those things. And so we went through that process. Like I said, our case was investigated for over 7 months. We had to go before a jury and give our story. He was 100% exonerated because of the evidence that was very clear. And they said, this was absolutely 100% self-defense. But even that in itself was extremely traumatic. And because I remember the day that it happened, like, obviously I knew we were defending ourselves. And I almost was kind of like, I remember when our attorney showed up that night, and I thought, why is he here? Like, and then it started clicking, like, oh, two people died. There's going to have to be an investigation. Like, of course, they have to go through their standard procedure. But just not even knowing 100% that, like, hey, maybe he will have to do jail time if the evidence doesn't show or whatever. It was a lot of uncertainty. And actually, the lead investigator, he told us when everything was done, he said, we investigated you as if you were the bad guy. And he said, literally everything that you both said, 100% matched up. It actually, oddly enough, my husband, he had very, like, good intuition. And when we first pulled into our driveway, there was a car parked down the road, and that was it was very oddly out of place. And that was one of the things that kind of gave us a clue, like, something's off. And he completely forgotten about this, but he had turned on his video recorder on his phone. And so, like, the first minute of the shooting when it started was recorded on his phone. And then I ended up grabbing his phone to call 911. And then, like, the rest of it was on 911, all except like 12 seconds when, I picked up the phone to dial. So they said, everything that you've said, we can match it up 100%. We know it was self-defense. So that's what we went through. That happened in February of 2020. And then he wasn't cleared, exonerated, I think, until late August, maybe September. So it was that whole year of 2020 going through that. We moved to a different home because I could not be at that home any longer. It was just we had a gate that we went through every day, and that's where everything happened. So it was basically impossible for me to come in and go and to leave without being triggered or activated by that trauma. And so, yes, that is what happened. And like I said, at that time, he was not working. We were living off his retirement. We were just kind of living our life. We go through that event. COVID happens. Everything shuts down. We move to where we live now. None of these businesses existed. And we basically, for about a solid year, did everything that you shouldn't do when you've gone through something like that. And by that, I mean, we went to, I would say, 3 or 4 different therapists. Didn't connect with the therapists. Honestly, I felt like they were a little bit at a loss as to, like, what to do with us. So we didn't connect with therapists, got frustrated with that process. COVID happened. So then it's like, okay, do it online. Then we're like, this is not helping either. So we would cancel therapy sessions. And then we just kind of threw ourselves into renovating our new house, distracting ourselves, and kind of honestly self-medicating with too much alcohol, too frequent, like I think a lot of people did that during COVID, because we were at home, and it even more so for us because we were trying to deal with this trauma and didn't really have the right tools. And so that became a coping mechanism. And the thing about alcohol is it makes you feel like you're a lot better than you actually are. So I think that we both kind of convinced ourselves for that first year that, hey, we're actually doing pretty good. Like we're really strong. Like look what we went through, and we're okay. You know, I've looked up the stages of grief, like it was totally that denial phase. And that worked honestly for about a solid year, almost year to date of the first anniversary of the shooting. And then one night, basically at dinner, him and I had a disagreement, and just it was kind of like this volcano that had been building, just kind of like erupted between the two of us. And there were just a lot of things said, a lot of things about the trauma, the grief and the pain that we both were feeling, but had not really communicated. And it just kind of all came out. And we are really at a place of brokenness, like within our marriage, within our family unit, 100%. And we both just kind of looked at each other and said, there's just a lot of water under the bridge here. It might be easier if we just go our separate ways. And so that's what we kind of set out to do, was we were gonna split up, we were gonna divorce. And that obviously sent me on a tailspin. I'm thinking, second divorce, starting over again. I was about 38 at the time, 37, 38 at the time. And I literally just spiraled, It was like the trauma of the shooting now had this second layer of trauma, because now my marriage is falling apart. My family's falling apart because I'm going to get emotional.
It's okay.
Because
It's a lot.
we weren't healing.
Yeah.
Yeah. And so suppressing all that worked until it didn't. And then it was like, I really came to a realization where it was like, you've got to do the work. You've got to heal yourself. And I honestly, I didn't know if Lindsay and I, that's my husband, could heal our marriage, but I knew 100% that I had to start with myself. And I couldn't just keep pretending like things were okay and kind of, I had this, I didn't want to talk about what we had been through because I just didn't know how to process it. I didn't know how to answer questions. I didn't know how to speak about it. It was so intense and so crazy.
Right.
Like I said, something off Dateline, so out of the norm that I didn't even know really where to start.
Yeah, I know. I mean, the way that you said it's not just the initial trauma, but all of that aftermath, the secondary trauma that can come from it. Like you were saying, the trauma itself is terrifying enough. And then to have something that mattered so much to you be negatively impacted, man, this love, this marriage, it feels unfair.
Right. And this might sound odd, but I have said the secondary trauma to me was almost more difficult and more painful than the initial trauma itself, because when the shooting happened, Lindsay and I were a unit. We were dealing with that together. We were still, united in that way. And then a year later, it was all of a sudden my life as I know it is crumbling. I literally just felt like it was falling through my fingertips, and I felt like I was on an island. So that was more difficult.
Yeah. I mean, that it makes perfect sense for the fact too that, like you're saying, you're doing the things, like you were trying to do the things to heal, and for it to just be like falling through your fingers like water
Yeah.
that you
Yeah.
just can't catch. It's
Right. And I don't think that I really, and this is the thing about trauma, like it's sometimes you don't realize how much pain you are really in until something like that happens,
yeah,
unfortunately. Because I feel like, our bodies are resilient, our minds are resilient. We have been created to like survive, right? Survive the elements and all the things like fight or flight, and so our bodies are resilient, and we can convince ourselves that we are better than we are, that we're not as broken as we actually are. And that was the thing that really hit me just like a tidal wave. I was like, man, I am broken. Like this event has changed me to the core. And I really do believe I needed to come to that realization of, hey, I am going to be different. Like I'm a different person after this has happened. I'll never be the same as I was before this happened. And coming to that place of acceptance, because that was something I didn't want to look at for a long time as well, was I didn't want to see myself differently.
right,
That was a step towards healing, was just accepting that this happened and being able to look at it.
right. That's such a crucial part of, I remember you and I talking about trauma integration and like being able to take something that can really have no positive purpose in the actual trauma, and to be able to step far enough back and be like, things aren't the same. And if I keep wanting them to be the same or resisting what is, the suffering is so much more intense and so much
Yes.
worse.
Hmm.
But being able to say, okay, now that I have what I have, it kind of makes me think of, honestly, I don't know if I had mentioned in our panel we were on, but my husband was almost killed by a drunk driver
I don't think so. No.
when I was pregnant, right before COVID.
Hmm.
So
Wow.
we
Same
were,
time.
yeah, we were
Yeah.
kind of totally different situations, but, and a really wild thing about healing, even on that level, not just as a family, there's been a lot of ups and downs and a lot to that journey, but even watching how you heal the brain, for example. So he's done neurofeedback
Yeah.
early on, and he's actually doing another round of it right now, currently, because we could tell he was kind of backsliding on some of the progress that the neurofeedback had provided. But
Right.
my point being that when you do something like neurofeedback to heal the brain after an injury or a trauma, you're not actually trying to help the brain function like it did before the trauma. You're trying to rewire areas of the brain that maybe used to not be so responsible for helping you live a healthy life to become stronger and come online so that you won't have the same brain you had before the trauma. You're going to have a completely different functioning version of your brain. And it kind of makes me think of what you're saying about like how you were even looking at your life, how you were looking at your relationships, how you were looking at the concept of healing. Like it couldn't be the same as
Correct.
it was before that day.
Right. Yes.
Right.
Yeah. And it was almost like things needed to completely fall apart for me to wake up and see that.
Yeah.
Um, I wish that was, well, I'll sit here and say I wish that wasn't the case, but I have come to a place through all of this where I just trust more now. Like
Yeah.
I look back at that situation and I would never have chosen it. I would not choose it for myself. I would not choose it for our life.
Right.
But I also look at everything that I have gained through that experience, because the trauma really took me kind of to the end of myself where I just, you're just this raw, exposed, broken version of yourself. And there is work to be done. And so part of me is grateful for that process, because I actually feel like post trauma, I am I'm so much more equipped in in certain ways that I just never would have become if I wouldn't have gone through that.
Right. So when you were at that point, where you guys looked at each other and said, I don't know if we can survive this.
Yes.
You're talking about accepting and recognizing that you're not the same. Things have to be different. How did you walk over that bridge? Because I feel like you're somewhere different today.
Yes. So things got worse again before they got better.
Like the bridge fell apart.
It just kept
Fell in
going
the
and
water.
going. Yeah, exactly. So when we said that, it was like, okay, we're gonna be done. We're gonna take steps towards, filing for divorce. We're gonna, go our separate ways, and that was the conversation that was had. And so I stayed at our house where we live now. And actually, ironically enough, the home where the shooting had happened, we still owned at that time. So, and that was like 15, 20 minutes from where we live now. So he went there and stayed there for a couple of days. And then the thing that shifted it was I started having like just tremendous panic attacks. I have had panic attacks off and on throughout my life. Anxiety and depression have been something I've battled since my early 20s. I mean, honestly, anxiety, I think, has been a lifelong thing. If I think back all the way to childhood, like really bad separation anxiety from my parents, all those things. That was already kind of part of my genetic wiring and makeup.
Right.
So then when the trauma happened, all of that intensified. Panic attacks just went from like, where in my 20s, maybe they were a 3 or 4. Now, after this, they're like a solid 10 every single time.
Yeah.
And I had a panic attack one night when I was at the house, by myself. My kids were with their dad, and Lindsay was not there. And I woke up, and I remember literally thinking, I am dying. Like my heart was literally going to pound out of my chest. My throat was constricting. You just cannot catch your breath. And I just thought, this is it. Like this, I am dying. I'm having a heart attack. I was having a panic attack, not a heart attack, but
They can feel the same.
Totally, they can. And actually, I learned from my doctor that your body responds in much of the same way. So that was interesting.
Interesting.
Yeah.
Okay.
But I picked up my phone, and Lindsay and I really were not speaking at this point. My dad had told me, he said, if you have trouble, call me. I'll be here in 10 minutes. Well, for whatever reason, I called Lindsay. Like, was not the natural thing to do at that point. We were not in that place.
Right.
And I called him, and he answered like on the second ring. And immediately, he could tell what was happening because he had witnessed it before with me. And I'm like, I think I'm dying. And long story short, he got in his car, drove from our home in Yellow Springs to where we live now, which, like I said, was about 15 minutes. Stayed on the phone with me the entire time. Came in to the house, to our bedroom where I was at, talked me through it, calmed me down. And then at that moment, something shifted. And I really have to say it was God intervening, because I don't even really remember what we said to each other, which is odd because I usually remember everything.
To his demise.
Yeah, exactly. But I don't really even remember what was said, but I just remember we were understanding each other in a way that we had not been able to up until that point. And we communicated just this very raw truth. Both of us did. And we came to this place where, you know what? We don't know if we can heal our marriage. We're not sure. Like there's so much work to be done. There's the trauma, there's the work within our family. Now there's work within our family unit because we have children involved. Like everything's kind of falling apart. There's so much to be done, but we are at least going to try that was where we came to, that we're going to do the work individually, and we're going to try and heal our marriage, and we'll just see what happens. And so we came to a place where we said we were going to spend some time apart, we were going to separate, but not take any further steps towards, getting divorced at that point.
Right.
And so he went away for like 45 days and went and did a lot of his own healing journey. Like I said, he's been in the nutrition and wellness industry for nearly 40 years. So he went and fasted and cleansed and did all the things that he knows to do. He ended up going to Costa Rica. He just was kind of like a nomad all over the place, but on a healing journey. And I stayed home and did my own version of that. And for me, I had a therapist that I was working with, got into therapy like twice a week, did some EDMR, started really getting back to the things that I had gotten away from, like good nutrition, exercise, prayer. My time with God every single day became essential. That was huge for me. And just really started putting the focus towards healing and dealing with all the things that we had been kind of brushing under the rug for a year.
So when you guys came back together, did it feel as instantaneous as that moment in your bedroom, or was it still a building process?
It was still a building process for sure. When we saw each other, because we ended up meeting up in Florida, we just wanted to have like a few days away from home, and so this was after like 45 days apart, and we had spoken some but not like every single day. And so we saw each other after that time. And I remember it was really interesting because the first time I saw him and I looked at his face, I could tell that he had done healing. Like his eyes looked softer to me. There was just like this softness in his face. You can tell when somebody's done inner work.
Definitely. Yes.
You can see it physically. And I would assume that he would say the same thing about me. So I could see that he had peeled back some of those layers and done work, but it was kind of like this awkward, weird, like, okay, now
Like
what?
a first date.
Yeah, like, okay, we're back together now. Like,
You're
so
like,
what
so
are we
that
gonna?
happened.
Yeah, I haven't seen you in like a month and a half, but there was a lot of like conversation to be had. Like, what? Okay, you've done, and I'll say you've done your healing, but we're still healing. It's a lifelong
Right.
process. But you've done a layer of your healing. I've been doing some of mine. We kind of connected and caught each other up on what that was. And then it was kind of like, okay, now how do we merge that back together as a couple? Like what do we need to do to heal as a couple? What do we need to do to heal our family unit? And so it was just kind of creating almost like a blueprint for healing going forward. Yeah.
The thing I loved so much about what you shared in your story is that it doesn't point to not being broken. It doesn't point to not suffering. It doesn't point to not feeling trauma, not having PTSD, not doing all the things that people who have endured trauma experience, but this like witnessing and this acceptance piece, this willingness to just say, yeah, this is how I'm reacting. This is how my body's reacting. This is how
Yeah.
my spirit's reacting. This is how I'm reacting within my marriage. Not, I wish this wasn't the case, even though, of
Yeah.
course, but this is the case.
Yes.
This is the case. And this is what we have in front of us. And what do we want to do with what we have in front of us?
100%. Yes.
Yeah.
Because I think wishing it, I mean, I will say to you, like the first year, I absolutely hated my life that year between when it
Yeah, I
happened
bet.
and like I was angry, I was resentful, I was honestly angry at God. Like, why would you let this happen? Like, this is,
Right.
why do I have to have this life? Why can't I just have a normal life? I was angry for my kids. Like, why do they have to have this situation where their friends are like, what's going on with
Yeah.
your parents? And there were so many emotions, and there was a lot of, I wanted to push back against it. I did not want to accept it. I didn't want to look at it. In fact, if anybody brought it up, I would change the subject as quickly as I could. Like the thought of sitting here talking to you like I am now at that time, I would have been like, no way. I will never do
Right.
that. Yeah.
Mhm. And you mentioned, I almost feel like we should have another chat sometime about your children and then and that piece. And that's what I love so much about these really raw, vulnerable conversations is that we can have one idea of what we're going to talk about. And if we follow the flow, it's going to go somewhere different. But you did mention your kids. And I guess the one and only question I would ask about that is if there's someone listening to your story and what you experienced, and they also themselves have experienced, whether it be an acute, horrifying trauma like you did in an instant, or if it's, years or generational trauma, What kind of responsibility, I'm using that word intentionally, do you think the traumatized parent has in protecting, guiding, caring for their child while they are trying to do the same thing?
Right. Right. I think the responsibility is just meeting your kids where they're at, and realizing that talking to them even if you don't have all the answers and you don't know how to explain what happened, and you know that they're going to have feelings and emotions that maybe make you uncomfortable, you still have a
Right.
responsibility to let them express that to you. Because, there were that first initial year, like I said, that first initial year was like my time to like make all my mistakes, like do it all wrong, like do everything that you shouldn't do. And but then after that shift happened, there was this I don't know, I just became oddly more comfortable with letting my kids see me for where I was at. I think that one of the things that we do as parents is we feel like we always have to know all the answers. We feel like we have to have like always have it together for our kids. We want them to look at us and think that, hey, mom just she knows, like,
Yeah.
and that is a lot of pressure, especially
Yes.
when you have gone through something like this and you feel the exact opposite and you are the exact
Right.
opposite. And so I would say the responsibility lies in being transparent with your kids. Of course, age appropriate,
To a degree, right.
Yes. My kids were young at the time. They were, let's see, I have an 18 and a 14-year-old now, so and that was 5 years ago. So they were 13 and 9.
Wow.
So they were young, but they were still old enough to know that, hey, this is not normal.
Right.
Mom, I can tell mom's going through a hard time. Lindsay's not here. Obviously, their stepdad's not here. And I started getting okay with talking to them about those things, you know. And it was part of the healing that we needed to do as a family, for sure.
I love how you put that to, giving them answers, even if you don't, giving them what answers you have, even if you don't
Yes.
know all the answers, because
Yes.
I think that's one of the things as parents that we think we have to be so prepared with all the answers and all the knowledge and be totally okay with something. And if we aren't, sometimes we tend to avoid a situation or not give the answers or only give a little bit of an idea. And I think when our children come to us with questions, they already know things
Oh,
and
yeah.
they're already creating narratives. And if they don't receive something from us, some sort of honesty from us, they're going to find the answers elsewhere.
Right.
And where they find them may not be a good source, or it may be false, or it may be unsupportive of kind of the healing journey for the family.
Yeah.
So, and
Yeah.
this really applies to anything. I mean, kids asking about tough things going on in the world, kids asking about natural progressions of life, if you
Yeah.
will,
Yeah.
things like that. So
Yeah.
I
Well, I
appreciate
mean,
what you're saying about that.
yeah, I think it is our responsibility to allow our children to feel what they're feeling, even if it's difficult for us, because when right after the shooting happened, so we didn't move to a new home for like enough for 2 months. We had to find a house and all those things. It takes a little time. They did not want to come back to that house because of what had happened. It was
Right.
scary. And again, they're young,
Absolutely.
scary. And are we safe? And is there more bad people and all those things? And they wanted to stay with their dad. Now, as their mother, that like was like a knife in my heart because
Yeah.
I just want my kids with me. And anybody that
Right.
knows me, like my kids are everything to me. But I remember thinking, this is not about me. Like they did not
Yeah.
pick this. And so I just supported that. And I said, if you guys feel better with dad right now, then you stay with dad. And we're trying to get a new house as quickly as we can. And mommy loves you and misses you. And I would go see them at their dad's house and do it as much as that as I could.
Yeah.
but I supported them in that space. I didn't force them to come back when they didn't feel comfortable. I just kind of allowed the natural progression of that to take place. And that was not easy. It
I
was not
bet.
easy.
I bet.
But
And
looking back, I'm very glad that I did do that.
especially because you gave them agency, like you gave them a sense of control in a situation that felt so out of control.
Yeah.
And that's to your credit, incredibly difficult to do, and probably such a big part of what helped you guys all heal together as a family.
I think so too. I think when kids are involved, you have to. It's not on your timeline. We always want it to be on our timeline. You know, it's like, well, we want things to be back to normal, and I wanted that. Like, I definitely felt that. Like, I just wanted a sense of normalcy, but I had to trust the process. You know,
Right.
and allow things to progress naturally and be patient. Man, that is such a part of this process is being patient with the healing, because especially when there's a family dynamic involved, not everybody's healing at the same speed, you know?
Good point.
And you may take a few steps forward and you're like, oh, great, things are getting better. And then you take a couple of steps back because healing is very rarely linear, as we know. So just being patient with that process was a huge part as well.
I love that. That's so important and not something I think many people talk about, that we all do heal at different paces. And if you're looking at the family as a system, and even, a couple, like that can happen within a
Right?
couple where
Right?
one person may feel like, well, why aren't you here with me?
Yeah,
Like I'm up here, you're back there. And then it
exactly.
can feel very frustrating and destabilizing.
Yes.
And that's, I mean, such an important point, and I'm glad you
Yeah.
brought that up too.
Yeah. Well, because my husband and I, like, even if I just look at the two of us, we went through the exact same situation, but
Right.
our healing literally looks night and day different. And I mean, you know, if you just think about the different scenarios, like I was in a state of pretty much, I was just trying to stay alive essentially. You know, I was in our vehicle the entire time. He was the one that was having to defend. He was the one that had to take two lives, take the life of the mother of his children. So it's a completely different situation for us, even though we went through the same trauma. Does that make
Right.
sense? What I'm saying?
Absolutely.
Yeah.
And there, to your point, in a really wild spin, there was an article I just read about witnessing versus being firsthand involved in
Yes.
trauma, and how
Yes.
it can have different impacts on the brain.
Mm-hmm.
And so even just to your point, I mean, you were in that trauma, but
Right.
even just to your point, like having to be like firsthand
Yes.
versus firsthand witness.
Right.
There's also some work around if you were mobilized during the trauma, it can
Mm-hmm.
metabolize differently. So that's to your point, why panic attacks, and this, I'm just going to like get clinical for a second,
Yeah.
but panic attacks can be much more prevalent if you were not able to mobilize, if you weren't able to act in a trauma.
Yeah.
And that a lot, because when we think of a panic attack, it's like stuck energy.
That makes total sense. Yes.
Right. And so
Yes.
without the mobilizing, and to your point about exercise and movement, how the antecedent to the anecdote to that sometimes can be mobilization and movement
Mm-hmm.
of the body.
Yes.
So even if
Yes.
you're not going back in time and mobilizing and saving the day during that, just moving energy in your body can help rewire that trauma
Yes.
circuitry.
Yes.
So
Those are both 100% accurate because I couldn't go anywhere. I was literally trapped in our car. So
yeah,
I wasn't mobilized. That makes 100% sense. And then exercise has been a key element of my healing, 100%. So that all lines up.
yeah.
Yeah.
Well, Molly, I could talk with you forever about this. I almost feel like we need a part two. I'll have to have you
Yeah.
back.
Yeah, no, I would love to talk because, we had said we were going to talk about generational trauma, and I have some thoughts on that. I would love to talk about that at some point. Yes.
Let's do
Yes.
it.
Okay.
You got to come back.
Let's do it.
Okay.
Okay.
Well, Molly, for those of the listeners who want to stay connected to you and, be able to be part of your healing journey, you had mentioned your different offerings earlier.
Yes.
But what would you say is the easiest place for them to just reach out, find you, maybe reminding them like your best website to connect with?
Yes. So tattoosonmysoul.com is where you can find me and kind of my story. Like I said, if you listen to me tell what happened to us and you're like, that doesn't make sense or whatever, it's hard for me to tell the whole story from start to finish. Go and watch the video on our website. You can find me on Facebook. Like I said, if you want to be a part of the prayer group, I have that as well. So, and then allinnutritionals.com is the supplement company. That's a way to reach out as well. So, yeah.
Awesome. Okay, Molly. Well, thank you for coming, and thank you everyone for listening, and be well, everyone.